President Johnson sends to Congress a bill to reinforce the right to vote. With Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach, the President signs an accompanying letter to the legislators urging swift passage for the bill that would outlaw discriminatory practices. Then the Attorney General briefs the press on the salient features of the bill. It would give his office the power to appoint federal registrars in 6 southern states where literacy and other voter qualification tests are required. The bill's aim is to bring to fruition the goal of minority groups that have staged protests throughout the nation. This is a demonstration in Montgomery, Alabama, led by Dr. Martin Luther King. In contrast to the violence of many marches, this one is held peacefully with police blessing and under permit.
If you go back and look at the history of the civil rights movement, we had leaders who were ministers and social workers and teachers. They weren't fighting for business or contracts. They were fighting for the right to spend money in white-owned establishments. So we were fighting to be customers. So the civil rights movement, although it opened up the conversation, it took another movement for supplier diversity to really take root and to get started. At 1965, in the heart of the civil rights movement, we were at a point where there was civil unrest. There were riots in the streets in 65 in Watts, 1967 in Newark and Detroit.
Governor Romney declares a state of emergency, requests federal troops and 5,000 paratroopers reinforce the National Guard, state and city police. The city's industry and business are severely affected, and a tight curfew is ordered in the Motor Center. A besieged city of guerrilla warfare. Sniper groups use day and night hit-and-run tactics before tanks move in to curb their window and rooftop barrage. Wreckage is everywhere. Civil rights leaders make a joint condemnation of the violence and call for an end to the rioting. President Johnson, using firm words, urges the nation's citizens to support the maintenance of law and order.
So when you look at the question of what are some of the milestones of the early days, obviously the riots were important. It raised the issue of the unrest of blacks. Then after the King assassination, it was a spotlight with the riots all over the country, a spotlight on the economic disparity between the black community, Hispanic community, and the white community. So Richard Nixon, and it was really interesting, history will not be kind to Richard Nixon, but on the subject of supplier diversity and minority business development, it was Richard Nixon who reached out to corporate America and said, we need to give blacks and other minorities a piece of the economic pie. And in doing so, it will help quell some of the disturbances in our urban areas.
Main goal of Richard Nixon's program for minorities is to recognize and honor human dignity. He creates new possibilities for those who want to go into business for themselves. This box and furniture business grew after the Nixon program helped owner Al Hollingsworth.
President Nixon is helping minority people through his black entrepreneurship program. In other words, being able to actively survive in a capitalistic system rather than being a reciprocant of capitalism, that being welfare.
With loans he obtained under the Nixon plan, J.G. Carrasco expanded his trucking business.
Without President Nixon's administration that put together SBA, there are a lot of small Mexican-American businesses that would not survive.
Len Fairchuck turned a small arts and crafts shop into a successful toy business with financing from the Nixon program.
Up until recently, no president of the United States, and I'm talking back to the times of the signing of the treaties over 100 years ago, no president has recognized the need of the American Indian people. And this legislation that President Nixon introduced will enable the Indian people to get into business and to provide for their own economy.
Many things happened that came out of that executive order, including the funding programs out of SBA for minority businesses, the MESBIC program, which generated the funding that allowed Reggie Lewis to build the company that he built. The 8A program came out of that same legislation. The initial funding for NMSTC. The formation of OMWI, which now is MBDA. This all came out of one executive order, which really, in my opinion, is one of the turning points in the evolution of supplier diversity.
In all fairness, I think Nixon wanted to do the right thing, but he also looked at it from a political perspective. And it was Nixon that created the concept or the thought of black capitalism. And he had some very smart people from Wall Street coming up with this very deep and very complex, and I would say admirable, concept of creating capital in the black community, because it was something that was lacking in our communities, and they took the ball and they ran with it. And I think there were many programs that were started. One was started as OMBI, the Office of Minority Business Enterprise. It was in the Department of Commerce. Also, he strengthened SBA because he saw within SBA they had the potential. Initially, there was some fighting between Department of Commerce and SBA, but they kind of got it together. And there's some very smart, very analytical people, many of them from Harvard and Ivy League schools, who happened to be of color, who designed many of these initial programs, and they were very effective. And they worked, and I came in after that was in place. And when Jimmy Carter came in all fairness to all the presidents, of all the presidents who really tried to attack minority business, I think Jimmy Carter deserves the most credit. Jimmy Carter, maybe because he was from Atlanta, maybe because he was exposed to Maynard Jackson and Andy Young and other people, he felt that there was a need to really catapult minority business development. He did it in a big way. He worked in concert with Harriet Michele and other congressmen. And Harriet Michele, I mean, people should know how many laws and regulations and executive orders has his footprint on it. Harriet Michele was a giant. And when you look back between the years of 1978 in 1982, you will see most of the major laws that were created to have set-asides, 95-507, I could list all of them, that talked about a need to have a set-aside for minorities. Then later women were added to it and other people were added. But it was Harriet Michele who was really, really fiercely in fighting this battle.
So you had a combination of the government mandate, the changing demographics, and enlightened CEOs that said, let's take this to the next level. And one industry specifically that took it to the next level was automotive. And I give Chrysler, GM, and Ford a lot of credit because they really led the way.
I got a call from personnel, and what they said was that my background with the military and with my degree and my experience, I was the prime candidate to do a program on supplier diversity. So my first question was, what is supplier diversity? And then I said, well, what is it that is missing? What is it that needs to be done? What is it that is unique to supplier diversity that will make it successful? The thing that I think we really excelled at was understanding the government and the part it played in supplier diversity. If you recall, the government said, if you sell us goods and services, then you must provide a certain percentage of those goods and services that you sell to us. You must provide opportunities for disadvantaged businesses. Well, at the time, we didn't have the type of the businesses that could satisfy what they wanted, like 5%. What we had at the time when I started were transportation services, janitorial services, okay, those large labor but small in value. And we said, if we're going to satisfy our government commitment, and the government really started tracking down on these suppliers who they were doing business with, but they weren't following what they call the small business law that says, we want you to do business with small businesses. That's part of our culture. We are a government of the people. And small businesses are the people that make up us what we do in the United States. And you got to be participatory in that. So with that, we said, okay, we looked at our supply base and come to find out that we couldn't meet the requirement that the government wanted for doing business with the government. We sell a lot of vehicles to the federal government, a lot of vehicles. So we said that we had the capacity and we had the knowledge and the wherewithal to do business with large corporations, large businesses. And if we're going to provide 5% to the government of everything we do with them, we got to have some large businesses. We can't have disadvantaged businesses with meeting the needs of the requirements of the government, doing landscaping and trash hauling and maintenance and what have you. So he said that begs that we need to get serious about how we're going to develop the businesses that can bring in the type of revenues that can meet the government standards. And the SBA was really getting hot on that. They really started cracking down on these companies who were doing business with small businesses, and small businesses were not really being developed. They were just being used, and if they couldn't meet the needs of the company, they throw them to the side. Well, we said we're going to not only look at developing larger businesses, because we have the capacity to do that. And it's important that we not let a supplier dive at General Motors, because that in turn will affect what Ford was doing, or Chrysler. We used to have real good sessions. We would meet, the team would meet off site and just talk about opportunities, talk about problems that we were having, talk about suppliers that seemed to be on the ball, some of those suppliers that were sloughing off, and how we can bring them back into the fold. And then we talked about our leaders, such as Sedlick, Tony Brown, who was on my side. They all loved Carlos Mazarin. So Carlos was a pistol. I mean, Carlos, I can't say enough about that guy.
And we put things in place. But after that, it kind of petered out. And unfortunately, minority business in the federal government never had the same gusto that it had under Jimmy Carter and Harriet Michele. The good news, however, is that's when the private sector took over. And I'll give credit where credit is due. It was the National Minority Supply Development Council under Harriet Michele and others, and a very strong board members. And at that time, presidents really got the word. And many of the people who were the CEOs of many of these companies in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s really believed. They were strong proponents of the civil rights movement. They wanted to affect change in their corporations. And when people within the corporations, we lose sight of that. There are many people who are now of color in the C-suites. And they were saying one of the things we have to do is create more jobs through minority business development.
When they write the history of supplier diversity, there will be a Harriet Michele chapter. What she did during her tenure, her 22 years, 1988 to 2010, she elevated the game for corporate America. She had personal relationships with CEOs to the point where she became an advocate for their success and they became an advocate for her success. And her work speaks for itself.
So I spent the first few years here, I came in 1988, actually building out structure, developing handbooks, making sure that certification was done uniformly across the network. We wanted to make sure that people understood that if you went to California and got serviced by a regional council, that would be the same experience as if you went to Massachusetts. Building out the network, common principles, commonalities in many ways to ensure operational excellence.
During the mid-1990s, Harriet Michele came to me and said, Ralph, we need to do something to train the program managers. And we met with Dorothy Brothers, the legendary program manager from Bank of America. And what came out of that discussion was the NMSCC Program Managers Seminar. First one was 1993, I believe it was. We had 40 program managers there, and it was a very robust, candid session where we had program managers, no MBEs. I was the only MBE in the room. And in fact, frankly, talked about best practices and how do we advance this whole notion of supplier diversity.
The Corporation of the Year Award, in fact, was, I don't know when it started, I'm sorry to say, but it was here when I arrived in 1988. But we made a very conscious decision to take a look at that award and make sure that it had value and that corporations would covet it and work hard to win it. So we set up these requirements. We set up the baseline. We looked at things like leadership from the C-suite in the program. How involved was the CEO or the CPO? Did the corporation, in fact, reward internally for the job that the Supplier Diversity Program had? Were they measured on their performance as part of their performance evaluation? Was that a part of it? How involved was the corporation in participating in NMSCC's programs? For example, did they send MBEs to Kellogg? Did they offer special training for MBEs? Did they encourage or in fact make a pathway for MBEs to have partnerships with each other or with majority suppliers to help them raise their level of capability? Because the issue always was, MBEs are so small, we need them to grow in capacity. It was always capacity. So what was the corporation doing to help MBEs reach the next level of growth?
Well, I'm delighted and honored to accept the award tonight on behalf of our team at Johnson Controls. I wish to thank NMSDC for recognizing our efforts again in such a significant way. It was almost 5 years ago tonight, 2003, that our former chairman and CEO, John Barth, who many of you know, accepted our first Corporation of the Year award. I can remember the excitement and the pride that we felt when we first learned of that selection at that time. This award is really the culmination of a 10-year journey for our company. In that short time, we launched our minority supplier development strategy and built it into a robust program worth of NMSDC's highest recognition. In that same year, in 2003, we also achieved our first seat at the $1 Billion Roundtable. Those achievements are really a testament to the strong commitment to minority supplier development by Johnson Controls purchasing and manufacturing communities.
It was very important that the process was transparent and that people understood that, in fact, the Corporation of the Year award was earned by every corporation that won it.
One of the questions that I hear often is, in a world of supplier consolidation, how do we think about the role of supplier diversity where so many corporations are trying to reduce the number of suppliers they have? Supplier consolidation creates a tremendous opportunity for supplier diversity. The essence of supplier diversity is diversity of thought, inclusion of new ideas. How do we drive greater innovation through having an intentionally diverse supply base? At Procter & Gamble, our data clearly indicates that our diverse suppliers actually deliver disproportionate performance results versus the average. I know that because we work with more diverse suppliers as we consolidate our supply base, that we'll be able to drive more cost savings, innovation, and efficiency in our products thanks to supplier diversity. But what we need to recognize is that why supplier diversity is important has shifted tremendously. It's constantly evolving. We need to be in the front of that. We need to help accelerate and amplify that change, not let that change happen to us. As we say at Procter & Gamble, our consumers are increasingly wanting to understand the company behind the brands they trust. We see consumers, not just millennials, that get talked about a lot, but consumers across the globe, of all ages, of all demographics, saying, I want to support companies that support what I support in the community and in society. And by the way, I also will stop buying products and services from companies that don't support those same causes. If we can elevate this work, if we can make it more visible and aware, and if we can think through this mindset, not just as supply chain professionals, which continues to be important, but also as marketing professionals, as communications professionals, and at the end of the day, as business professionals and business leaders, we can be on the forefront of making supplier diversity not just more important than it's ever been, but the single leading and driving force for consumer behavior in this country and across the world.